Morning, Don. How you doing?
Steve, how are you?
Good, thanks. Tuukka has expressed a desire to return to the Bruins, and provided, the surgery comes out well. Where is your willingness to bring Tuukka back?
Yeah, obviously Tuukka has to have off-season surgery and reevaluate how he's doing coming out of that. As he mentioned, he knows he's had a torn labrum, wants to make sure that Dr. Kelly, who's likely to perform it, there are no surprises, and then go from there. Indicated to us that he fully intends to rehab with the intention of coming back, and we go through our meetings and such and planning going forward that we have to factor in that he could be a part of that. Whether or not that means that the two young guys get the bulk of the work in the early going and see where Tuukka comes, or we go to augment our group and create internal competition, and then reevaluate how Tuukka's feeling coming out of the rehab process.
And just in retrospect on that series, are you satisfied that with Tuukka's condition, he was gave you the best chance to win?
Well, I think Bruce, described that yesterday, the process that we went through. I had some challenges throughout the year, from his maintenance standpoint. The hip sort of aggravated his back, took some time. Obviously, we had the advantage of allowing Jeremy and even Daniel at that point in time to play some games. Yara was out with COVID. So, we got a bird's eye view of how those two young kids were going to react in some situations. And we felt comfortable either way with whatever direction we were. We went with Rask, in the Washington series and played really well. And we felt all along we've had this same mindset. I think everybody would agree over the course of the last 2 years that we were going to manage the starts and the workload of all of our goaltenders, and rightfully so. As it turns out, the vast majority of teams have used two goaltenders even in the playoffs, and that's something I think you have to be aware of as you go forward, that you may have to, whether that's performance-based or injury-based. And in hindsight, could we have maybe, Game 5 is probably the only one that we would second guess in that, right? Because, Tuukka didn't feel his best in that particular game. The other games, he felt fine and reestablished that he was fine to play in Game 6. So second guessing is not part of it. Reevaluation as to whether or not we can make better decisions and what puts all the players in the team in the best situation to have the most success is what really all that matters.
Thank you.
Dan Roach.
Hey, Don, good morning. Just a thought kind of following that up. Where are you as far as an organization about maybe going with either Jeremy or Daniel as goaltenders from what you saw from them this year, and where they're at in their development in your mind as far as becoming, consistent NHL goaltenders? Well,
again, time's going to tell whether or not either one of them is going to be a number one goaltender in the National Hockey League. I think we feel very comfortable where the depth of the organization is at, having those two young players. And we're at the early stages of, just learning that Tuukka has decided to have surgery. And, we have to make a decision if we're going to go to market and bring in a player that we feel is ahead of those two players, or certainly from an experience standpoint, or we do roll the dice a little bit, allow those guys to see if they can handle the workload, which is a tall task. I mean, make no mistake about it, it's a tall task. I mean, it's a small sample size with Jeremy. He's played extremely well. Daniel played well in his starts. Obviously had an overall hiccup as a team. I think we were pretty beaten up to play Washington the one night at home, but Daniel acquitted himself really well, in particular going in and play against Pittsburgh on the road in that game he played. So again, we're still in the early stages and feel comfortable with the depth, but we have a very crucial decision to make and chart a course for certainly the first part of the season as to when Tuukka would be ready. We have to forecast that accurately if Tuukka does decide to come back and play, and how he fits in.
Joe McDonald.
Hey, Donnie. Along the same lines as Tuukka, as far as his contract expiring, both Krejci and Hall have said that they have a desire to come back to be with the Bruins. Just how do you see that scenario for both those players playing out?
Yeah, and talking with both players at the end of the year, and even when Taylor got here, he's expressed interest, mutual interest. to have him back, have an early conversation with his representatives, and obviously we'll have to see where all the pieces fit together. In David's case, it's very unique in the fact that he would like to continue to play with the Bruins. He's obviously expressed interest that he may return home at some point in time, whether that's next year or down the road, and the family dynamic is important to him. So he's asked to have a little bit of time in the next few coming days to allow him, again, on his own, to have conversations with his family, and then we're going to sit back down and have a real honest conversation. I do believe that David, does want to continue to play, and he's made it pretty clear, and we would like to make it clear that this is a place that he should continue to play, should he choose to, at the NHL level.
And last one for me, Donnie. Just obviously the back end changed a little bit this year, got a little younger. Just how would you assess the way those younger guys came in during the regular season and during the playoffs? Thanks.
Well, we did make a change. Certainly, both the players that had left, chose a different path, and we respect that. And I would like other people to respect the decisions that we've made in the sense of allowing some of these younger players to have some of those prime minutes and see if they can continue to grow. I think we did an adequate job throughout the course of the year. We certainly had some challenges. We had 8 concussions alone on our back end. So you're mixing and matching, and we had some players like Jared come in and play well in some situations. We added Mike Riley from a puck moving standpoint, who fit himself well. We realize we need to have depth in the organization on the back end, and certainly losing Carlo and Miller, for the last series, it definitely presented some challenges. You had other players that had to go into penalty killing situations in primary minutes that we had spread that around pretty cleanly with Brandon and Kevin. So the challenges exist. You have to have depth. Overall, would we like to improve and have difference makers in every position and on the back end included? Absolutely. To do a better job there as an organization and make sure that we're never deficient in those areas is certainly something we aspire to do. And overall, you have to account for the injuries, but if teams lose 2 out of their top 6 when you're going through a playoff round, it's going to have a residual effect. It's not an excuse because you have to have depth. And I think at certain points, the younger guys acquit themselves well, and other times they race, they met stumbles, and they had some stumbles and had some roadblocks, but that's to be expected.
Kevin Dupont.
Am I unmuted here?
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Okay. I think this question's, I know this question's related to the Hall Krejci answer, but the way you moved ahead with young defensemen this year, are you prepared to move ahead with young forwards in the coming season?
Do you have anybody in specific, Kevin, that you'd like to ask in terms of, as I just referenced?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
Taylor and David. But if you have somebody that you'd like to ask me directly, I'd be happy.
Yeah, I mean, are you ready to move in Kuhlman full-time, Studnicka full-time, Lauko? Have you got the same confidence in 2 or 3 kids there, or others that you're ready to implement in the somewhere in the 12?
I don't think we've ever handed over a roster spot to even any of our younger players. What we've tried to do is create some internal competition and allow those players to go in. And at some point in time, if they're ready, and really push other players out. I think we've made some tough decisions over the course of the years when players have been able to do that. Brandon Carlo and Charlie McAvoy are great examples, but we did feel comfortable to give them an opportunity, a low zone in that sense. Zaboral this year, Jake DeBrusk in previous years, Anders Bjork in previous years. So we've allowed for opportunity to present itself, but the player has to prove that he's ready to go. And those players will get an opportunity. They have to prove it. They're not incumbents to go in and say, okay, there's our second line left winger, third line right winger, third line center. That's not how we draw it up. We realize you have to have depth, and every one of those players that you just mentioned doesn't provide depth and competition within our group. But we would like to have an even stronger group to create even more internal competition. I think Taylor and David would add to that and need to be added to that. If it's not those two, then it'll probably be the other 2 players that we will target and go after and hopefully add to the competitiveness of our group.
And yesterday, Bruce brought up the focal point or need for a veteran guy to ride with Carlo. Do you see it as on the number 2 pairing? you see it as essential?
Well, it depends where, guys get slotted in, whether that's Mike Riley coming back or where Grizz slots in or Lozano. I mean, in a perfect world, every coach is going to ask for the best players they can possibly have. And Bruce will be no different in that regard. Pretty much coaches are like Christmas every day. If they can find a new president of the tree, to be happy to unwrap it. If we can draft it and develop it like we did with McAvoy and Carlo, and hopefully we'll continue to do it, and Lozano and DeBoro and McIntyre and guys that are able to continue to progress, that's a perfect scenario. If not, you have to go out and acquire it or supplement it through free agency. And that's my job to continue to try and do, better in every area. And again, you won't win. It falls back on the decision makers that have to find better players. And obviously we have to execute better to the level that we're capable of. And, I think the Islanders did a little bit better job in some of those areas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe Haggerty.
Hey, Donnie, when you look at the big picture from the beginning of the year all the way through the playoffs and think about, roster composition, strengths and weaknesses, needs, are there in your mind, as you evaluate here, are there specific areas of improvement or need going into this offseason? And if so, in your mind, what are they?
Well, I think we have to address some of the players that are unrestricted. We have some restricted players that have to fit in as well. You have expansion that you're likely to lose a player, Joe. So some of that's a little hard to predict as I sit today. We have some areas of depth that I think we'd like to continue to address. It showed up through the Islander series when we got dinged up and ran into some injuries. I think that the depth of the Islanders roster and their scoring ability showed up, and ours, we just didn't get it done to the level that we needed to. Otherwise, we'd still be playing. So we have to acknowledge the shortcomings in both to a player level and at a management level in terms of the roster composition, as you pointed out. And so we have to target some areas and expect some improvement in some players that they would admit and did admit that they fell short in, and how the pieces fall. We've been a very competitive team, and we put ourselves in a position to compete at the Stanley Cup level, and we've just fallen short. Obviously, we got to the ultimate level a few years ago, and had really strong regular season. We beat a very good team in Carolina 2 years ago, a very good team in Washington this year. We've just fallen short and haven't performed at the same level in the next round, and that's what we want to do and do better.
Fluto.
John, two questions on free agency and then one on defense. First, will you sign any of your unrestricted guys before the expansion draft?
Well, the preference would be not, given the fact that we have expansion. It creates other problems for us. So I think that, again, we'll have discussions and hopefully be able to find common ground. But you run the risk that you get into that interview period and period beyond expansion that may get closer to a deadline that they find ground somewhere else that they feel is a better fit. So there's a risk there. And but again, the fact of expansion and exposing other players associated with that, you want to keep the strongest roster you possibly can on the depth side of things, and we want to try and do that like everybody else.
Okay. Are you allowed to come to agreement on terms before then and then officially sign after the expansion draft?
Yeah, you can only talk in generalities with your players. You could never come to a full-fledged agreement and not file the contract.
Okay, got it. All right, and then a question on defense. Just how did this season inform your philosophy in terms of composition on the defense, whether that's more leaning toward the physicality and the strength and the thickness, perhaps, or in terms of the retrieval and recoveries and quick movement, maybe the Riley and Grzelcyk mold? And I'm sure every team would like a balance of the two, but where do you see that in line with how the league is going?
Well, I think you're right. In fact, you'd like to have a balance. You don't pick your opponents. Some teams are built with speed and transition, a little heavier in that regard. I think you have to really have the ability to play any different way. I mean, going into the Washington series and talking about the physicality of that team and how we were going to hold up with Grizz and Riley and players of that nature. And we felt we had players that, with that stiffness side of things you described, and Carlo and Miller and McAvoy, the way he plays, and Lozano. So again, the balance. Now, when the injuries come, what's your depth look like to be able to go in and plug those holes? That's where, it gets a little bit, there's some variance associated with that. I think you have to be built to play any different way. I mean, you look at Vegas and playing against a real strong, heavy skating team, fast team in Colorado, and being able to offset that. And obviously they played very well to be able to counter that. And their D was involved last night and being a part of their transition game, but they're big and strong and they're mobile. I mean, in a perfect world, you have a combination of both. And we found that as we were going through this season, that our puck play and our transition game, that's where Mike came in and supplemented that a little bit to help us. And then again, when the injuries come, it's sort of like, okay, you're going to test, the depth of the organization, and maybe that's where we fell short to some degree. But overall, we just didn't execute, in particular in a couple of games that the margins are small enough that it shows up and you go home rather than move on.
Matt Porter.
Don, on expansion, given the way you've spoken about, the three defensemen, McAvoy, Carlo, and Grzelcyk, would it be fair to say that your toughest calls there are going to come among the 7 forwards?
Well, we got tough decisions to make all the way across the board, as does every team. I think we all experienced that going through the Vegas expansion draft. So you're going to lose a good player. We've come to a decision like we did last time that I think you limit the, maybe the mistakes of adding to that, based on the fact that they put themselves in a position, the rules are there, for their benefit, and you just have to try and hope that they pick one guy that you might have depth to replace, or you have to go to market to replace. But I think we're going to stick with exposing the one player and move on from there.
Jimmy Murphy.
Hey, Don, how are you?
I'm okay. Jimmy, how are you?
Good. Kind of going back to Duke's question, I guess, not so much specified on the forwards, but just adding more youth into the lineup. We talked, I think, maybe before last season, just the transition of leadership that was starting to take shape. And, you were trying to identify what young players come in and be part of that core, maybe even not young players, maybe guys like a Charlie Coyle or something. What's your evaluation right now on where that transition of the leadership core is?
Well, I mean, it's still to be determined in some regard. You're seeing players that are playing bigger roles both on and off the ice, and a little bit of that is a natural progression of the leadership and responsibilities. I really don't believe that you're born into that. I think you have to acquire that, and I think you have to be the type of personality that can accept that type of responsibility. Patrice is a best example, in that. And obviously, I watched Raymond go through the same thing. Players that had language barrier when they first started out, but it didn't change their personality on the ice and their work ethic and their ability to compete and ingratiate themselves with their teammates. And I think that's most important in a leadership, that you're looked upon as a person that somebody beside you wants to go to battle with and can also talk with off the ice. And I think that we've got several young players that are moving in that direction and being more and more comfortable and been integrated into that. And again, I think that's why our leadership group welcomes the opportunity for the newest player, Charlie in that case, or Brandon in that case, who's a union representative. So I think we're moving and allowing that to organically come to the surface without forcing anybody into those roles. And we're going to have to continue to do that. As the players age and move on, you have to have the next players, the next wave. And you're right. It's stuff that we do discuss and talk about and integrate those players into it so that they feel more comfortable as responsibility comes their way.
And just to follow up on that, based on what you've seen and everything you just said there, is there an interest in, maybe with the amount of cap space you might have right now, bringing in a veteran player to kind of augment that?
Well, I think, again, Taylor coming in and earning the respect of his teammates, trying to play the right way and integrate himself. Lazar coming in, been part of other organizations, coming to be part of our fourth line, the fabric there. Yeah, I think we do need to continue to bring in those types of players. You have to be careful and walk the line when you're going into free agency, and because the pieces have to fit. Trying to do our due diligence in how players, Craig Smith, probably a great indication of that this year, knowing the type of player he is and how he would fit into our group, went well. And we have to continue to try and do it properly and respect the guys that are here but also augment it, as you say, and supplement and tap into. Because again, players in other organizations have had success, and the more that we can bring that into ours, the more that we're going to move forward as a group.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Last one, Mick Colagio.
Hey, Don. Just by the way, congratulations on a hell of a run here these last few seasons, bringing back, with this core, the way Detroit did, the way Pittsburgh did. You guys have also done it. And so then the fundamental question is, as the older core ages and maintains performance because they're such professionals and committed, and you got this younger group that's trying to catch up to them and mature so that they become one team that can contend for the Stanley Cup. Do you think you can keep going back to this well and expect that the older group is going to continue maintaining as the young group catches up? Do you still have 100% faith that if you can put that team back together, that this group can win as is?
Well, I think we have to continue to add to the group. I don't think you can expect to bring the band back together if it wasn't able to complete and accomplish the ultimate goal in the last couple of years. I mean, obviously they've been extremely close on several occasions, and having won it, several years ago, they put themselves back in a position to compete for it. And ultimately, that's really what they ask. They ask you as an organization to surround them with quality people like themselves that can elevate their game and grow. And to me, that's what it's all about. Can they continue to do it? I mean, the tread life of the tires, you don't get to swap that out. So it's going to drop off. The performance level of several of the guys that you've discussed has been pretty damn proficient over the years here. And we've been fortunate in that regard. Injuries, you just never know when they're going to come. You just don't know you're going to lose two righties, going through a series. You just don't know. They play hard, but they want to win. And ultimately, they want to be surrounded by good players, good teammates, and that's what we're going to try and continue to do. And that's either through the draft or through acquisition. And sometimes we've traded away younger players that we felt would be parts of it, but we've added to the group. Charlie Coyle's an example of that. He come in and has done a good job. He's got to have an off-season maintenance procedure to get back to the full health, and he can help drive from that third line spot. And but that's just one example. Nick, I appreciate you acknowledging that we've done a good job, but we need to do a better job if we expect to win at the highest level, and that's what we try and do as an organization. And those top-end players, albeit they've moved on a little bit in the last couple of years from an age standpoint, are still awfully competitive and still awfully productive players. And, Pasternak's a great example. McAvoy's a good example. These guys are also at the elite level now and can help drive and supplement and complement the group. And, as a management staff, we have to continue to find the right pieces to surround on those guys if they continue to play. And Krejci's a good example of somebody that, again, would like to continue to play. He's got some family decisions that he wants to incorporate into that, and then we move forward and react from there.